Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this panel, Women in Aerospace panel, entitled Space, New Paths Towards a Balanced and Inclusive Development. We are very glad to host the distinguished panelists and all the audience. The Mexican Space Agency and in general the government of Mexico is really honored by the presence of you all in this International Astronautical Congress in this beautiful city of Guadalajara. This is the capital of Silicon Valley of Latin America. High-tech, computer technology, semiconductor, software, which are the building blocks for space. This is really passionate to continue expanding women's opportunities for leadership and increasing their visibility in the aerospace sector. The women that are here at a panel with me are being part of an ever-growing network which benefits young professionals that are still looking for a path. We need dedication in expanding women's opportunities for leadership and increasing their visibility in the aerospace community. When women design new products or services, they bring a different perspective that too often hasn't been considered before. That's true in any industry, but it's particularly notable in the fields of science, technology, engineering, and space. As more women enter the aerospace field, we are seeing the difference of women's perspective potentials. Then we are very glad to be receiving in this panel Mrs. Simonetta Di Pippo, that is General Honorary President of Women in Aerospace, Mrs. Sandy Magnus, Executive Director of American Institute of Aeronautics and Aeronautics, Barbara Ryan, Secretary Director of Group on Earth Observation, and Mino Ratanaspati, Executive Director of Space Generation Advisory Council in this Congress. I will be glad to pass the floor to, first in that order, Madame Simonetta Di Pippo. She is UNOSA Director. She leads the office strategies, policies, and activities, ensuring that they are implemented in accordance with the mandates of the General Assembly, the Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, COPUOS, and the established policies of the United Nations. She supervises the United Nations Program on Space Applications and UN SPIDER. Welcome, Mrs. Simonetta Di Pippo. You have the floor.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I would like to talk a little bit about what at the Office for Outer Space Affairs we do in strengthening international cooperation when we deal with space activities for global health. I'm sorry, the first 2 or 3 slides I've been presenting them already in the last few days, but it's important that I summarize here, which is the main goal of the office, which is to promote international cooperation in the use of outer space for peaceful purposes and to achieve development goals for the benefit of humankind. And the main 3, let's say, keywords which describe well the work that we do at the Office for Outer Space Affairs and also the uniqueness of the office. On one side, we are a capacity builder for member states of the United Nations, and so we bring the benefit of space to humankind, helping in building capacity for non-space-faring countries, and in particular for developing countries, not only, but with a special focus in developing countries. We are a global facilitator, as I said already, so we have a growing number of players in the space arena, and so our platform is really the right one to put everyone together and to facilitate the exchange and the synergies. And we are also the gateway for outer space in the United Nations system. We are the only office in the United Nations system dealing with space 100%, and we report to the General Assembly. And on top of that, we also lead an internal mechanism for coordination of all the UN entities which are dealing with space, not because space is their main focus, but because with space activities and space-based data and infrastructure, they can help their teams to fulfill their mandates. Also, we have been talking a lot about the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and here I'm using this slide to summarize in a more, let's say, friendly way the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, which have been grouped into 5, let's say, P's, as we call them, so people, prosperity, peace, partnership, and planet. This brings me again to something that I've been mentioning several times in the last few days, which is Unispace Plus 50, which is a global conference that we're going to organize in June 2018 in Vienna, marking the 50th anniversary of the first Unispace conference, which was held in '68 in Vienna too, and will shape the future of space activities of global space governance. And also this leads me to, I already mentioned several times, the 7 thematic priorities which the Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space approved back in June this year. And there is one out of the 7 thematic priorities which is particularly relevant for the topic today, that we are discussing today, which is the thematic priority number 5, strengthen space cooperation for global health. Now, what we would like to do, and this is what has been discussed and agreed by the Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space under this umbrella, strengthen space cooperation for global health. The goal is to improve the use of space technologies and space-based information and systems in the global health domain, to promote enhanced cooperation and sharing of information in emergencies, epidemics, and early warning events, as well as on environmental parameters. And the aim is to put together a certain number of initiatives to enhance capability in integrating Earth data in disaster management plans and strengthen capacity building in advancing space technologies in global health efforts, as well as to identify governance and cooperation mechanisms. I don't want to go into much details, but for sure the rationale for this thematic priority and the reason why the Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space was so strong in approving it is that there is a clear understanding that we need to strengthen international cooperation in the better use of space technologies for global health, in particular for disaster management, but not only. There are a lot of initiatives at international, regional, and national level which could be put together in order to better collect, organize, and analyze in situ data on environmental factors which could impact in a negative way the public health. And also there is the push from the Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space that in many instances space-based Earth observation can really provide a lot of important information on several factors. And then, as usual, quote-unquote usual, capabilities in developing countries have to be developed in this respect. And this is important also for the debate today. These are the expected outputs of this activity, which is just started because, as I mentioned before, the decision on the 7 thematic priorities has been taken by the Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space back in June 2016, which means 3 months ago. So we are just at the beginning of the preparation. And so also comments and inputs and proposals is the right time for me to collect them. And so this panel also, I hope, can help me in better, let's say, shaping this program program on time for an informed package to be presented in June 2018 in front of member states at the time of Unispace Plus 50. Quickly, strengthen capacity building in advancing space technologies in global health efforts, enhance capability in integrated health data in disaster management plans, updated climate and hydrographic models to provide information for public health program managers, campaigns for data collection and analysis designed for hotspots or recurring events, and additional efforts to facilitate technology transfer, such as those supporting the International Space Station program, for example, including in areas of telemedicine, water purification systems, and so on. Among the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, we have one SDGs which is particularly focusing on global health, which is number 3. Good health and well-being. And I'm not going through this slide, just to give a set of examples of the space technology contribution to a certain number of Sustainable Development Goals. And what we are trying now to discuss and to put forward in the discussion under the umbrella of the Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space is that space is really, can be considered as a good tool for the fulfillment of the Sustainable Development Goals. So the milestone of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development 2030 is really a milestone also for us. This is just an example of what we are doing right now. For each SDG, we are mapping our current activities in terms of the various SDGs. So the activity that we are currently doing at the Office for Outer Space Affairs are being mapped towards and in line with the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. This is just an example of the Space for Global Health 1. And there is a link between the SDGs and what we call informed and resilient societies. Because for sure the success of the implementation of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and therefore the possibility to match the goals in, at the milestone in 2030 will also depend a lot of collaborations and cooperations that we will be able to put together and across all sectors. So it's not anymore something which goes on specific, let's say, guidelines and precise tracks, but we have to look at all the elements in the picture. What we call connecting the dots is becoming more and more important, at least in our vision to present and to prepare Unispace Plus 50. So we have navigation, communication, information from remote sensing, space-based technology, and so on. And also cutting-edge technologies are really indispensable for us to match, as I said, the goals in 2030 and beyond. But, you know, also relevant for the discussion today, the panel discussion today, is also SDG number 5, the one dealing with gender equality and also with women's health. Because we have to consider that it's not only a question of this, let's say, discrimination or the way in which consider the two genders, but it's also a question of how women react in a different way, for example, in microgravity conditions or in other situations, and also the importance, for example, of women when we talk about disasters and emergency response and so on. So there are a lot of activities which, from which we can really benefit from considering women not only at the same level of men, but even with a certain focus. Again, I'm not going through these slides, just to give you eventually, if you want a copy of this presentation, to provide you with a certain number of information. This is, you know, a slide in which we have put, I put some cross-cutting areas information and the link with a certain number of SDGs. Here you have climate change, the gender dimension on biodiversity and so on, with the link with the various SDGs. And then I go to a project that I briefly presented already this morning in another event, a Space for Women. This is linked to a requirement coming from member states, which of COPUS, which asked us to focus on education, especially STEM, so science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, putting a lot of attention on women, and in particular in developing countries. So again, this was approved in June 2016, again, 3 months ago. We started to put together the project. The title is Space for Women, and space is, I mean, double meaning. And so what we would like to do, this is part of the thematic priority number 7, capacity building for the 21st century. And in the course of 2017, in order to prepare for June 2018 and the Unispace Plus 50, we will organize an event. And as I said, I hope it will be in Latin America again. We would like to put around the same table and bring the collective community, space community, and not only the space community, but we would like also to enlarge to others. So UN entities, space agencies, NGOs, researchers, experts, more in general, so all the potential stakeholders, in order for us to collect inputs and proposal and be able to, again, make a sound proposal for member states in June 2018. And for sure, one of the elements will be how we use space for women's health. So, just to conclude, space is a new path towards balanced and inclusive development. I just put here 5 out of 17 Sustainable Development Goals, where we can have a very strong connection between, okay, women, space, STEM, education, and you name them. And as I said, space is a tool, in our opinion, for fulfilling the 2030 agenda, but what is important right now is to connect the dots. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Simonetta. Your talk has been very inspired to promote the humanity in general, but women in particular, to the information society and to the space society. Of course, taking into account the specificities of women that need, in certain cases, focused attention on these specificities. Thank you very much. Our second panelist is Dr. Sandra Magnus. We are very glad to host her. She's Executive Director of the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics, the world's largest technical society dedicated to the global aerospace profession. Please.
Well, good morning, everyone. I'm going to talk about this topic from the viewpoint of some of the things that are going on Space Station and some of the experiences that I've had. You can see on the slide some of the many things that we're learning in space about health. The things that we're learning in space about health can be translated to a lot of other areas, you know, globally, as we work to take the information and the knowledge and the experience that we gain in space and apply it in different places in health systems around the world, but also even technology transfer into other fields. Biochemistry and nutrition, it's a very interesting area in space. I participated in some studies that were basically tracking the biochemical and the nutrition changes in my body as I was on station for 4.5 months. And it's a wonderful database that is even being archived, so people can go back and get to that data as new questions arise, as we learn more and more about what happens to your body in space. Basically, I had to track every day what I ate and drank, and then every 30 days I did a blood sample and a urine sample, and those specimens have come down, and that database is getting bigger and bigger. And I thought that was actually one of the rather more interesting studies I participated in. I was using it as a way to make sure that I was maintaining good nutrition. Where I would check with the principal investigator, and he would say, oh, eat more iron, or eat these foods, you need more potassium, or you already have too much salt. So I was getting constant feedback, and that was a very powerful experiment that, again, will live on because of the reservoir of samples that are accessible to the research community. Technology development demonstration, space station is a wonderful platform to not only do technology development and demonstration, but also develop procedures. Simona mentioned telemedicine. We did some experiments with that on orbit where we were studying the blood flow. So it's kind of fun being a human guinea pig, by the way, so they do fun things to you. So we'd put a tourniquet around our legs to restrict the blood flow to our heart, and then we had an ultrasound machine where we do a countdown, 3, 2, 1, and release the tourniquet, and then they track how the blood flow changes with that restriction and the lack of the restriction in microgravity. And so we are not experts at ultrasound equipment, and so we would have a doctor on the ground who would be giving us instructions on how to work the ultrasound to do this fairly complex experiment. And so in the process of even acquiring data on an experiment that had to do with human physiological changes, we were able to also experiment with protocols of communication and clarity of how to work a complex piece of machinery without a lot of technical knowledge about that piece of machinery. Also, I was doing a lot of air sampling and surface sampling and water sampling. It seems like every 30 days I was doing that. And we were testing some, if you will, lab on a chip technology where instead of having to collect the specimens and put them in a petri dish and wrap them up and put them in a warm part of the station where they could grow little colonies of whatever for 3 days, we would have a sample chip that had already was pre-made to detect certain kinds of fungi and bacteria, and we could put the sample, like the water samples, for example, on that lab strip and insert it into a very small, calculator or iPhone-sized device and get an instant piece of information about the kinds of antibodies or viruses or fungi in the atmosphere or on the surface sample in the water. Very portable, and we were testing it for its reliability and for its ease of use, again, by an operator that's not necessarily super skilled in the technology nor in the science behind it. That was working really well, and it really reduced our time, and it really increased the accuracy of how we were able to measure the system. Cardiovascular research, we're doing a lot of cardiovascular research on board. One of the things that they really test us for before we go to space station is the health of our cardiovascular system. On the US side, that's one of the things they anticipate could cause a medical issue. So my heart has been looked at every possible way that you can look at a heart. And so on orbit, they also go through that same kind of testing, and we're learning a lot about how the circulation system changes, how the cardiovascular system changes, and this is all information that can be translated back down into the health systems and the information that the research community and the clinical community use around the world. Balance and neuromusculoskeletal, I'll have a story about that in a minute, but we're also testing things like that. I think one of the more unpleasant tests that I ever have done was the tilt test. And they put you on a platform they do this several times, so you get to do this more than once. They put you on a platform and they make you close your eyes. Luckily, they have you attached to some cords and some cables, and they start moving the horizon on you and moving this plate underneath your feet, and you have to basically react just by your senses because your eyes are closed. And they also have one where your horizon's moving. And they're testing your neuromusculoskeletal and your balance. And you do that immediately when you come back as well, which is a lot of fun, and that's when you're really glad you're on the cable. And there are differences, and so we're learning a lot about that. And there's experiments that not only are being conducted on human beings as us, the guinea pigs, but also at the cellular level, at the genetic level, on bacterial fungi. We're learning a lot. And then there's the unknown unknowns, things that we learn just by anecdote of having people in space and doing experiments. And sometimes the experiment might not get done exactly the correct way, but yet you learn some information about that as well. But one of the unknowns that I experienced that really surprised me was coming home from space station after 4.5 months, I was going into my physical training, which was about 2 hours a day for 6 weeks, and that's the rehab program that you go through after a long duration mission. And about 2 weeks into my rehab program, my physical trainer had me stand up, and he put 2 cones in front of me about this size, about this far apart, and he put a stick across the cones, and he had me stand in front of it, and he said, I want you to jump over these cones, the stick. And I looked at that, and I was like, oh my goodness, that's so high, because I felt gravity weighing on me. And so I jumped over it, and when I landed on the other side with my feet flat and my knees locked. And it hurt, and I said, ow. And he said, that hurt, didn't it? And I said, yes. He said, do you know why? And I said, no. He said, you landed with your feet flat and your knees locked. And I said, really? And I was fascinated by that once I got through the pain. It's like, because that is a neuromuscular response that you learn as a child. When you jump, when you automatically learn that when you land on the balls of your feet, and you bend your knees, and that cushions the shock of landing. My body forgot that because I did not use it. So there are, and I was told, now I relearned it very quickly, of course. Yeah, I was very excited about that. But what it tells you is there are subtle things that happen to the human body that we still don't understand. And of course, it happened much faster in an orbit, in a microgravity environment, because that's a very aggressive environment when you think about it, as far as the change from a 1G to a micro G. But it says something about, I think, how our bodies adapt to what we do with them on a daily basis, and how we have to use these muscles that we've been given and things like that. And so I think there's a lot that we have to learn just by being in space. Things that we don't know that we'll learn over time, and that's the importance of having a platform like the ISS where we can learn these things and again take that knowledge and translate it into ways that can help people here on Earth, clinically and in research. And so what are the things that we have been doing? I'm not going to read this slide, I'll let you read it, but there's a lot of discoveries that have been happening over time. We've been doing research on the station really since the first day, even though it's been a mix of assembly up till 2011, but there's been a lot of research done, and there's a lot of biological research, a lot of human research that's going on from researchers all over the world, and you can read some of the benefits here. I don't think we've fully appreciated nor fully tapped out the potential of the space station. I believe there are a lot of people in the human research community, the biological research community, the chemical research community, the genetics, all of the life sciences. I think there are a lot of people in that community who don't appreciate yet the power of being able to do an experiment in microgravity. I think as a space community, we have to continue to reach out to these other communities and inform them of this potential that they have in microgravity to learn more. There's a lot more we have to learn. I think even after 15 years, 16 years of research on the space station, we have a ways to go, and we're still at the beginning. And I'm excited about the potential, and I hope that all of you will continue to reach out to those of you in your life science communities and encourage people to consider crafting experiments and research for microgravity and for the space station. So I think, in the terms of global health, there's a lot more we can do as a space community to help that solve some of those problems. So I think I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandy. That's very provocative talk about the great challenges of human spaceflight and the specificities of women in space in the health scenario. Thank you very much. Our next panelist is Mrs. Barbara Ryan, a friend of Mexico with several governmental agencies that need this information from space for all our economic activities, agricultural, natural resources, fisheries, tourism, and climate change responsibility. Barbara is the Secretariat Director of the Intergovernmental Group on Earth Observation, the GEO, in Geneva, Switzerland. GEO is comprised of nearly 100 member states, the European Commission, and 90 international scientific and technical partner organizations. Barbara, please.
Well, thank you very much, and it's indeed a pleasure to be here today, not only to thank Mexico for your generosity, WIA for sure as well. Christina, thank you so much, and then to be on the panel with some old friends and some new friends, so thanks everyone. Maybe following the theme a little bit about using space differently or thinking about it differently, I was asked to maybe just present a couple slides on Earth observations and human settlement. And what I've said is both formal and informal settlements. So these next couple slides are going to give you a view from space on human settlement. A couple slides just from Landsat, a program that I had quite a bit to do with when I worked for the U.S. Geological Survey. But a perfect example of looking from space at human settlement, 1984, the city of Las Vegas, 2009, same city. We could come forward to 2016. I think the population growth over that time frame was something like maybe 350,000 people in 1984, and in 2009, I think it was something 5 times that. I think it was something like 1.5 million, and it's clearly gotten more since then. So not only can you see from space the migration of people on the landscape in an area like this from optical images, but let's drill down to some of the other parts of the radio spectrum, where this is data from NVSat. Unfortunately, don't have access to those assets anymore, but this is looking at land deformation, largely due to groundwater withdrawal. And so, of course, you can see that here in Las Vegas, some of it was controlled by faults or subsurface structures. Again, something that you might not have been able to have predicted before this imagery came in. And this is an impact of that same urban growth. So there's an extraction of natural resources based on that growth. Now this is, at this graph, it looks like it's about maybe 10 centimeters of subsidence, but clearly that is enough to affect structures where people live. So let's just call that formal settlements. Now let's move to maybe the informal settlements. This happens to be from an area in Zimbabwe, Porta Farm in 2002, where there was, although they're fairly uniform streets here, it was still considered by the government of Zimbabwe an informal settlement, and they had actually put in place some policies to eradicate these informal settlements. So this is 2002. This happens to be higher resolution data from one of the commercial providers, Digital Globe, as compared to the Landsat or the NVSat data that we saw on those previous slides. But let's fast forward to 2006, where those settlements have in fact been removed, so over that 4-year period. And then just a graphic that shows the number of settlements or the individual structures that would have been removed over that 4-year period. Now, this was largely some work done by AAS, American Association for the Advancement of Science, but regardless, I guess, of the political implications of the policies to remove the settlements, there are a couple things that I think are important from a space-based perspective, and that's that when, I think it was Amnesty International heard about the change in policy and actually got Digital Globe involved, you were able to go back into the archives and look at the pictures of 2002. So I think what's really important for us, certainly from the Group on Earth Observations perspective, is that it's not just about the pictures or the images or the imagery that's collected here and now. There is a substantial value to historic archive data. And I think that's really important for us as institutions to remember that while, particularly from a private sector, you may not sell much of that data, there still is a value in assessing landscape change, or in this case, human informal settlements. And then maybe just to bring this back to the theme of this entire panel, I think it's largely been shown that much of the migration on the landscape, certainly in informal settlements, adversely affect women and children. And so I'd like to kind of tie that loose end up for us. So maybe in closing, something we're fond of saying, countries have borders. Earth observations don't. I think we need to do whatever we can to continue to advance broad open data policies and practices so that we can truly leverage the assets that, that we have on space, in space. And I think that's my last slide. So I'll turn it back to you.
Yeah. Thank you, Barbara. I needed 20 decibels. Thank you, Barbara. Very, very interesting talk. We are all willing more and more real-time information, but past information is equally important. And thank you for mentioning that from space there are no borders between the countries. Thank you very much. Okay, our last panelist is Mrs. Mino Ratnasbapati. I think I make progress in pronunciation. She is current Executive Director of the Space Generation Advisory Council, and a non-governmental organization which acts as in support of the United Nations Program on Space Applications. Then Mino, please.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to talk from a little bit of a different perspective from my other panelists today, but given the topic of the panel, I want to give you a perspective from a young person, a new professional, a young professional coming into the space industry. So I absolutely love this slide whenever I'm asked to talk about women in the space industry. And I think that if we look back from 43 years ago when Valentina Tereshkova first launched on Vostok 6, 43 years ago, it's really incredible that the topic of women in space is still an issue. There is a misconception that space is a male-dominated industry, and to be very honest, it's not just the space industry that feels that way. There's so many other industries, you know, energy, mining, engineering, that have this misconception that these industries are male-dominated. And I think if you look at the esteemed panelists here, it is completely false. So I wanted to give you a little bit of my insight working at the Space Generation Advisory Council about what I've learned about women coming into the space industry. So the first thing I've learned is that space is not boring. We are just really bad storytellers. So if you look at, I would say, children between the age of 0 to 14, all they want to do is be astronauts and go into space. But somewhere along the line, they lose this passion. And I feel that the space industry really need to tell the general public not just how great we are, I mean, we're great, don't, you know, there's no doubt about that, but about the benefits of space industry and how great, or the different career paths that they can take. So I am a researcher. I love statistics and data points. And one of the things that I've been looking into is what does research say about early career women? And there's two things that women in particular look to when choosing a career. One of which is environment. So they want to give back to society. They want to make sure there is a greater good in the environment. The second is helping people. So what I think that, and I've pointed out here in my slide, is that we need to make sure that we express to the general public that space is a humanistic effort. We talk about astronauts, we talk about sustainable development, we talk about Earth observation, but that general message is not being told to the public, and that needs to change. So what needs to be done? I am definitely not going to solve everybody's problems, but these are a few things that I have found in my position as the executive director. Firstly, we really need to integrate the next generation. So Simonetta and my other panelists have talked about the importance of STEM education from an early age. And I think that, you know, if you look around the Congress here, there's so many students and young professionals which have, quote, been bitten by the space bug, but really encouraging that conversation between young professionals and students with high-profile professionals is crucial to having people more interested in the space industry. And I think that what we don't do is tell the general public the different career paths that are involved in the industry. So, you know, people think, oh, I have to be an engineer or I have to be a scientist to be an astronaut, and that's absolutely not true. I've been in the industry long enough to know that we have lawyers and doctors and even accountants, but everybody is really crucial, and involving them is absolutely essential. Something that I always say when I talk about young professionals is that young professionals do not want to be spectators. They want to be participants. So really involving them is crucial, I believe. And I also think that there are opportunities for organizations when they involve these young professionals to grow themselves. So it's really a fresh perspective. I think that people my age really have come through this technological development and can provide a new insight of what's going on. And I always tell, you know, heads of agencies and people that they are the ones that make the plans. They are the ones that set the goals. But it's really the young professionals who are going to be doing the job to make these goals a reality. And one last thing I'd like to say is that space has no differentiation between men or women. Ultimately, we're people, and that's what we should believe in. So with that, I'll hand it back to Dr. Mendieta.
Thank you, Mino. Then we witness the dynamism and the energy of the new generations, young professionals and young women professionals. Then we have made the tour of the panelists. Next, I would like to enter another stage. I would like to ask the panelists for a recommendation. Normally, I ask to give a 1-minute recommendation, but now I am willing to ask you to give a 140 characters recommendation to a woman from a developing country, and particularly 140 characters a recommendation to a young woman from developing countries to inspire to the information society and to the space society. Let's do that. Do you take this challenge? Then the same order, Simonetta, you have the floor.
Before the 140 characters, let me let me try to put it in context. Yeah, because I have to say that this is a question or whatever, something that is recurring, and also the fact that in a way we are perceived as role models in a way. And I have to tell you, the first time that it happened to me, that someone told me, I mean, you are a role model for me, I was looking around and say, are you sure they took it? Talking to me. Okay, fine. No, because frankly, I believe I'm doing what I believe is right, and I'm not questioning about the position. I'm just questioning about the fact that in certain positions you can do things better. That better in my scheme. So, 140 characters. Do what you believe is right for yourself.
Thank you very much. Then, Sandy, you can make an introduction, then
Well,
a recommendation, and then a conclusion.
I have a common message that I give young people when I talk to them, because I do talk a lot to young people. I enjoy it. I think it's very important. And here's what I tell them. Find your passion, find your dream, and go for it. To be successful, it really takes that, finding your passion. Perseverance is very important. Focus is very important. And don't forget to ask the people around you for help, because people want to be helpful. People want to help you. So sometimes we're afraid to ask for that help. But if you are focused, you have a passion, and you have perseverance, it does not matter where in the world you live, you will be very successful. And that's what I tell students when I talk to them.
Barbara?
So I think it's a Winston Churchill quote, never, never, never give up.
Thank you very much. Then Mino, to close this panel.
It is really hard to follow up on all of this, but I think that we all have the same message. Since it's 140 characters, I assume that it's going to be on a tweet, so I'm going to use hashtags if that's fine. So I'm going to say hashtag SpaceGen, hashtag no barriers.
Okay, then we are very happy with those very provoking and thoughtful comments, the answer to this challenge. The young generation needs short bullets, recommendations. You are role models, you are leading professionals, and particularly you are inspiring personalities to the women and to all the humankind in this information society and in this space society in which emerging countries, developing countries are really willing to enter, and the way is absolutely asking, communicating, and networking for international cooperation. Thank you very much for your kindly presence. We are very happy in Guadalajara, Jalisco, Mexico. Thank you very much.